The Empire believed it had mastered fear. From the towering spires of Coruscant to the burning dunes of Tatooine, the mere silhouette of an Imperial Star Destroyer blotting out a planet's sky was enough to crush rebellion before it began. 25,000 crew members, thousands of stormtroopers, TIE squadrons, heavy armor, and enough turbo-laser firepower to glass a continent. An Imperial Star Destroyer was not merely a warship. It was control made metal, order forged into steel. But on this particular patrol through the Outer Rim, control fractured in a single impossible moment, and something older than civilization stepped into the galaxy. The Devastator-class Star Destroyer Vindicator was conducting classified hyperspace field testing near an uncharted gravity well, far from civilian traffic lanes. Engineers in sterile white uniforms monitored a prototype interdiction pulse generator installed beneath the ventral hull. The experiment was meant to refine the Empire's ability to rip vessels from hyperspace mid-transit, an innovation that would make smuggling, rebellion, and escape obsolete. Precision, domination, superiority. The bridge crew observed quietly as the generator spooled up, emitting a low harmonic vibration that rippled faintly through the deck plating. Outside the viewport, starlines shimmered against the black. Then the black tore open. Not an explosion, not a misjump, a tear, a jagged fracture in space itself, twisting like molten glass pulled too far. The vibration turned into a shriek of stressed metal, though the hull remained intact. Sensors spiked into incoherence. Gravity fluctuated. A surge of radiation flooded the lower decks. For 3 seconds, reality warped, and something fell through. The rupture collapsed as suddenly as it formed, leaving only residual ionization and a massive, unidentified object plummeting directly toward Hangar Bay 3. The object struck the Durasteel deck with enough force to crumple landing struts and shear cargo containers in half. Alarms blared instantly. Dock officers shouted for containment teams. Stormtroopers rushed from ready stations, rifles raised, white armor reflecting emergency red lighting. Smoke cleared. The object resembled a freighter hull, primitive, scarred, patched with scrap metal. Its design was foreign, asymmetrical, battered as if dragged through hell itself. The forward plating had split on impact, revealing darkness within. Movement flickered inside that darkness. A shriek echoed across the hangar, not mechanical, not electronic. Alive. The first dock worker vanished before anyone understood what they were looking at. One moment he was shouting into a comm link. The next he was lifted off his feet and slammed into the freighter hull with bone-shattering force. Blood sprayed across the Durasteel. In a violent arc, troopers opened fire instantly. Blue blaster bolts lit the hangar, scorching into a massive, scaled shape that emerged fully into view. It stood taller than a Wookiee and broader than a Gamorrean. Horned skull, muscular tail, talons longer than vibroblades. Its hide absorbed blaster fire with sizzling impact, but did not immediately fail. The creature moved not with blind rage, but with terrifying precision. It closed the distance before the troopers could adjust formation. One swipe tore through plastoid armor like brittle ceramic. Another impaled a trooper clean through the chest, lifting him effortlessly before discarding him aside. Then a second shape leapt from the freighter wreckage, and a third. They spread with unnatural speed, splitting into vectors, targeting clusters of movement, isolating prey. Screams filled the hangar. TIE mechanics scrambled for cover beneath starfighters. Officers barked for E-Web heavy repeaters. A squad attempted flanking maneuvers, only to be ambushed from above as one of the creatures scaled the vertical bay wall with predatory ease, claws embedding in metal. Within 2 minutes, Hangar Bay 3 was silent except for labored breathing and the distant hum of failing power conduits. The creatures vanished into the access corridors. Bridge control received the emergency transmission 30 seconds later, fragmented, soaked in static and panic. Captain Ralston gripped the armrest of his command chair, jaw tightening. Seal decks 4 through 9. Initiate internal lockdown. Deploy full trooper suppression units. The bridge remained composed, but unease crept into posture and tone. The Empire did not panic. It responded. Below, bulkhead doors slammed shut. Red containment barriers activated. Scanner teams attempted to track the intruders, but their biosignatures were erratic, fluctuating between heat spikes and near invisibility. They were moving through maintenance shafts too narrow for standard droids, cutting through sealed panels, rerouting through coolant conduits. A Stormtrooper lieutenant rallied 2 squads near Junction Corridor Oryx 7. Bodies already littered the passage. Engineers torn open, armor shredded. The lieutenant ordered thermal detonators prepped. Motion sensors blinked erratically. A tail whipped from the darkness behind them. The lieutenant didn't finish his command. The attack was not chaotic, it was surgical. The creatures targeted rear guards first, then heavy weapons. They disabled lighting grids, plunging corridors into shadow. Blaster fire echoed wildly, striking walls, occasionally hitting scaled flesh, but never long enough to bring one down before another flanked. This was not invasion by army. It was infestation by apex predator. On the bridge, Captain Ralston requested immediate contact with Lord Vader, whose shuttle was en route from a nearby sector inspection. Protocol dictated transparency in extraordinary events. The captain described the situation in measured tones, though the casualty count climbed by the second. Vader's reply came cold and controlled. Maintain containment. I will arrive shortly. In the hangar's wreckage, one final shape stirred inside the twisted freighter hull. Larger, heavier. A deeper growl vibrated through the torn metal. The Alpha emerged slowly, surveying the carnage with calculated stillness. It inhaled deeply, tasting the sterile air of the Star Destroyer, memorizing scent and vibration. Then it moved, not toward chaos, but toward the ship's inner arteries. If you want to see more terrifying crossovers like this, where nightmares from other worlds collide with the Empire, hit that subscribe button now and drop the name of a creature or character you want unleashed into the Star Wars galaxy in the comments below. Deck by deck, the Vindicator transformed from symbol of dominance into labyrinth of prey. Stormtrooper reinforcements established defensive choke points, but the creatures adapted. They tested barricades, feigned retreat, then attacked from alternate corridors. One Deathclaw, designation assigned hastily by xenobiology officers reviewing sensor footage, allowed blaster fire to draw attention, while another emerged silently from a ceiling vent, decapitating the E-Web operator before heavy repeaters could charge. The Empire prided itself on discipline. Yet discipline faltered when fear became tangible. Helmet cams recorded troopers firing wildly into shadows, breathing escalating inside armor. Comms filled with overlapping distress signals. Engineering reported claw marks embedded 2 centimeters deep into durasteel plating. Life support maintenance indicated structural compromise in ventilation grids. Something was mapping the ship. The Alpha reached a central junction overlooking 3 major transit corridors. It paused, head tilting slightly as vibrations traveled through its claws pressed against the deck. Thousands of heartbeats pulsed through the steel. It understood territory instinctively. On the bridge, long-range sensors confirmed no additional anomalies. The rupture had been singular. Whatever had come through, it was limited in number. That knowledge brought little comfort as casualty projections climbed past 100 within the first hour. A squad attempted to deploy seeker droids for aerial surveillance within interior sections. The droids lasted 19 seconds before being ripped from the air and crushed against bulkheads. The creatures learned quickly that red-lit corridors conceal them. They targeted power relays next, severing non-essential systems to widen darkness. The ship's AI attempted adaptive countermeasures, rerouting illumination grids, but each correction only revealed new blind spots. Reports described talons penetrating trooper armor with minimal resistance. Medical analysis suggested extraordinary muscle density. One blaster wound recovered from a fallen specimen indicated partial tissue cauterization, but not immediate lethality. These were not mindless beasts. They were hunters, and the Empire had brought them aboard its own fortress. Hours passed with no external communication permitted. The Vindicator drifted in silent orbit, its internal war escalating deck by deck. Captain Ralston stood rigid as updated projections crossed his console. If containment failed and the creatures reached primary reactors or command spire, catastrophic systems failure could occur. Then proximity alarms signaled an approaching shuttle. Darth Vader had arrived. In Hangar Bay 1, his shuttle settled smoothly. Stormtroopers lined the deck, though even they bore subtle signs of strain. Vader descended the ramp without haste. The atmosphere trembled around him, cloak flowing in controlled silence. He paused briefly, sensing, not through fear, but through imbalance. Not a disturbance in the Force. A void within it. Something alive, yet absent from its currents. Report, he commanded. The surviving commander detailed the situation. Casualties. Movement patterns. Failures. Vader listened without visible reaction. Then he ignited his lightsaber. The crimson blade cast a sharp glow across polished armor and shaken faces. Open the blast doors. Deep within the Star Destroyer's darkened corridors, claws scraped metal as the Deathclaws continued their advance. The hunt had only begun. The blast doors of Hangar Bay 1 parted with a hydraulic groan, revealing a corridor bathed in emergency red light. Smoke lingered in the air from overloaded circuitry. The scent of scorched plastoid and blood hung heavy, metallic and thick. Darth Vader stepped forward without hesitation, boots striking durasteel with deliberate rhythm. Behind him, a squad of stormtroopers formed a tight wedge formation, E-11 rifles raised, their discipline restored somewhat by his presence. Fear had shape now, and he intended to meet it. The corridor beyond bore the marks of savage engagement. Deep gouges carved into walls. Ceiling panels torn free. Bodies dragged, no repositioned, into shadowed recesses. Vader paused briefly, kneeling beside a fallen trooper. The plastoid armor had been punctured cleanly through the chest plate. The edges were crushed inward rather than melted. Blaster scoring was minimal. The trooper had not even managed to fire. Vader extended a gloved hand over the corpse. He searched the Force for residue of intent, rage, malice, hunger. He found only fading terror. The attacker had not radiated emotion through the Force. It had acted with predatory instinct, but its presence was muted. A ripple of movement echoed from the ventilation shaft above. Contact, a trooper shouted. The first Deathclaw dropped from the ceiling in a blur of scaled muscle and bone. Vader reacted before the troopers could fire. His crimson blade ignited in a flash and carved upward in a precise arc, severing the creature's forelimb mid-leap. The Talon spun away, clattering across the deck. The creature roared, a guttural, thunderous sound that reverberated through the narrow corridor. It did not retreat. Blaster bolts followed instantly, striking its torso in rapid succession. Burn marks scorched its hide, but it continued forward, jaws snapping toward the nearest trooper. Vader stepped between them, blade flashing again. This time he aimed for the neck joint, slicing through thick scaled flesh with focus power. The head separated cleanly, crashing to the floor in a heavy thud. The body remained upright for half a second before collapsing. Silence returned, broken only by troopers adjusting grip on rifles. Vader studied the fallen creature. It was formidable, dense bone structure, redundant muscle layering, claws capable of penetrating reinforced armor. Yet it lacked discipline. It attacked directly. It could be countered. A shriek echoed from deeper within the deck. Multiple. Vader rose. Advance. The squad moved with renewed confidence. Vader at point, blade illuminating the corridor. Motion scanners blinked wildly, unable to lock consistent signatures. The creatures were moving in erratic arcs, sometimes doubling back, sometimes pausing entirely. They were testing response times. In Junction Corridor Oryx 7, the aftermath was worse. Dozens of stormtroopers lay dead, some dismembered, others crushed. Blast marks riddled walls. A heavy repeater turret had been overturned as if it weighed nothing. Vader sensed them now not clearly, but as pockets of violent intent barely brushing the edges of perception. Their connection to the Force was shallow, almost absent, as if evolution had shaped them in a world untouched by it. They existed outside its harmony. A blur shot from a side passage. Vader pivoted, deflecting a swipe of claws that sparked violently against his blade. The impact forced even him a half-step back. The creature's strength rivaled that of a Wookiee in full fury. He countered with a force push that hurled it into the opposite wall, denting durasteel inward. Before it could recover, he thrust his saber through its chest cavity and held it there, ensuring total organ destruction. Behind him, another Deathclaw burst through a maintenance hatch, seizing a trooper and slamming him into the ceiling hard enough to crack armor and bone. The squad opened fire in controlled volleys. Concentrated blaster impacts began to overwhelm the creature's hide, driving it back. Vader extended his hand and crushed its trachea with invisible pressure. The snapping sound echoed clearly before the body fell limp. 2 more shrieks sounded from above. "They are coordinating," Vader observed quietly. As if in response, overhead, lighting failed entirely. Darkness swallowed the corridor. Only Vader's crimson blade provided illumination now, casting long, jagged shadows against blood-slicked walls. Through the Force, he felt movement, fast, circling. One lunged from the left, another from behind. Vader extinguished his saber. The troopers gasped. Then he moved in darkness. Claws met empty space where he had stood. Metal screamed as talons scraped a long bulkhead. Vader reappeared in a pivoting slash that carved through one creature's spine. Without pause, he caught the second mid-leap in a telekinetic grip, suspending it inches from his mask. It thrashed violently, jaws snapping at nothing. He studied its eyes, feral intelligence, territorial fury. "Primitive," he murmured. With a tightening of his fist, bones shattered inward. The creature fell in a heap. Lights flickered back on as emergency reroutes restored power. The troopers stared in silent awe. But even as these fell, sensor reports indicated at least a dozen more signatures moving through Deck 8 and descending toward engineering. The Alpha had changed trajectory. In engineering control, officers frantically reinforced reactor containment barriers. If the creatures breached coolant systems or hyperdrive core stabilization, the Vindicator could suffer catastrophic failure. Turrets were positioned at access corridors. Automated defense grids activated. A maintenance officer reported hearing scraping within the walls themselves. The Alpha emerged not from the main corridor, but from beneath the floor plating. With brutal force, it tore upward through reinforced deck, sending engineers flying. Its size dwarfed the others. Thicker horns, heavier musculature. Its hide bore fewer burn scars, either more resilient or less exposed thus far. Turrets opened fire instantly. The Alpha moved unpredictably, using fallen machinery as cover. It closed distance rapidly, leaping atop a console and launching itself into a cluster of technicians. Screams erupted. Automated cannons recalibrated, then abruptly ceased. Power in engineering flickered. The Alpha had severed a primary relay with a single calculated strike. Darkness returned. Moments later, emergency lighting activated. But now the creatures had advantage. 3 more Deathclaws burst from adjacent conduits, overwhelming remaining defenders. On the bridge, Captain Ralston's voice remained steady as he ordered full internal security deployment. Casualties were approaching 400. Entire decks were compromised. Vader sensed the shift. The pattern of movement was no longer random. "They are adapting," he said. He turned sharply toward a lift shaft. Engineering. The troopers followed as he descended deeper into the ship. The Vindicator was no longer a battlefield of scattered skirmishes. It was evolving into layered territory control. The creatures were targeting power infrastructure, life support nodes, choke points. They were claiming the ship. As Vader reached engineering's sealed blast door, a deep, resonant roar vibrated through the deck plating, longer, heavier than the others. The Alpha. Vader ignited his blade once more. Behind the blast door, metal screamed as something massive struck it from the opposite side. Claws pierced through reinforced durasteel, bending it inward. The door began to buckle. Stormtroopers raised rifles. forming a defensive line behind their Dark Lord. The second strike dented the barrier nearly to collapse. Vader extended his free hand, bracing telekinetically against the oncoming force. For the first time since arrival, resistance met equal pressure. The Alpha pushed back, not through the force, through sheer physical might. The door exploded inward, and the largest Deathclaw yet stepped through the smoke, eyes locked directly onto the black-armored figure standing at the corridor's heart. For a heartbeat, Predator and Sith regarded one another in silence. Then both moved. The Alpha moved first. It did not roar. It did not posture. It launched forward with terrifying speed, its bulk crossing the shattered threshold in a single bound. Durasteel buckled beneath its landing. Stormtroopers opened fire instantly, a storm of red bolts striking its torso and shoulders. The impacts scorched its hide, burned through outer scales, but it did not slow. Vader stepped into its path. The creature's foreclaw came down like a descending vibroaxe, powerful enough to cleave a human in half. Vader caught the strike on his crimson blade. The impact reverberated through the corridor, a shock wave that rattled ceiling panels and sent two troopers stumbling backward. The Alpha pushed, not mindlessly, deliberately. Vader felt the pressure, not through the Force, but through pure physical force transmitted through blade and arm. The creature was stronger than any Wookiee, stronger even than most cybernetically enhanced beings he had encountered. Its muscles flexed like coiled cables beneath scaled flesh. He redirected the strike, pivoting sideways and carving a precise slash along its ribcage. The saber cut deep, cauterizing instantly. The Alpha recoiled half a step, more from surprise than pain. It learned. The next attack was lower, aimed not at Vader's blade, but at his legs. Vader leapt backward using a controlled force-assisted burst, clearing the sweep by centimeters. The talons tore through the deck, plating where he had stood. Behind him, troopers adjusted formation. Focus fire. Joints and eyes. They aimed for softer tissue. Concentrated blaster volleys struck the Alpha's shoulder joint repeatedly. Flesh began to rupture beneath sustained heat. The Alpha shifted tactics again. Instead of charging Vader directly, it pivoted toward the trooper line. Vader reacted instantly, extending his hand in a crushing grip. The force closed around the creature's throat and spine, halting its forward momentum. The Alpha strained against invisible pressure, claws gouging furrows into Durasteel as it resisted. And it did resist. Unlike sentient beings who panicked under telekinetic compression, this creature simply pushed back with animal ferocity. Vertebrae began to crack, but slowly. Vader narrowed his focus. The corridor darkened as he drew deeper on the force. Machinery rattled. Loose debris lifted from the floor. The Alpha's struggles intensified, its roar finally erupting, deep, thunderous, shaking the air. With a decisive tightening of his grip, Vader crushed the creature's trachea and snapped its spine in two. The Alpha collapsed heavily to the deck. Silence followed. Smoke drifted through flickering red light. The stormtroopers held position, rifles trained, waiting for movement that did not come. Engineering was secured, for now. But sensor reports continued to update. Other Deathclaws had dispersed through lower decks, splitting into smaller hunting packs. Casualties were climbing again in auxiliary control, life support maintenance, and hangar access corridors. They fragment to overwhelm, an officer transmitted over comm. Vader extinguished his blade and stepped over the Alpha's corpse. Seal Deck 8. Vent atmosphere in compromised sections. There was hesitation on the bridge. Lord Vader, we still have personnel in those. Seal it. Moments later, bulkheads slammed shut across affected corridors. Warning klaxons blared. Emergency lighting shifted to vacuum protocol. Air began to roar outward. In multiple compartments, Deathclaws were caught mid-ambush as atmosphere evacuated violently. Some clung to deck plating, talons anchoring into metal. Others were pulled into space through ruptured hull sections. Several died. Several adapted. In one corridor, a Deathclaw anchored itself with all four limbs, muscles bulging as pressure dropped to zero. Its thick hide and redundant organ systems endured the sudden vacuum longer than anticipated. It crawled forward even as debris spiraled past it into open void. On the bridge, officers watched in stunned silence. "These things can survive exposure," one muttered. "Not indefinitely, but long enough." Vader sensed it too. Their resilience bordered on the unnatural. Not force-enhanced. Simply evolved to endure nuclear wastelands, radiation storms, predator hierarchies that rewarded only the most durable. He turned toward the lift again. Prepare containment fields in Hangar 2. The next battlefield would be chosen, not reactive, but controlled. Hours passed in brutal attrition. Deathclaws isolated in vacuum-sealed decks were eliminated through controlled decompression and heavy, repeating blasters. Others were funneled deliberately through access corridors toward pre-designated kill zones. In Hangar 2, the Empire prepared its trap. Cargo crates formed layered barricades. E-web heavy repeaters were positioned on elevated platforms. Shock net projectors lined entry points. Above, time maintenance crews cleared the space, removing volatile fuel cells. Vader stood at the center of the hangar floor. He was not waiting for the creatures. He was drawing them. Through subtle manipulations of pressure seals and corridor lighting, through calculated venting and access denial, he forced the remaining Deathclaws into converging routes. Predators followed patterns. Even without language, they understood territory and prey. And Vader made himself the prey. The first pack emerged from the far cargo corridor. 3 of them, moving low, cautious now. They had learned from prior engagements. They did not charge blindly. They circled. Stormtroopers held fire, awaiting signal. The second pack entered from starboard maintenance access. 2 more, 1 smaller, likely juvenile, but still deadly. 5 remaining. Vader ignited his blade. The sound drew their attention immediately. Their eyes fixed on the crimson glow. One feinted left, while another darted right. Now Vader commanded. Shock nets fired simultaneously from concealed emitters, crackling with high-voltage energy. 2 Deathclaws were caught mid-leap, convulsing as electricity coursed through muscle and nerve. The others reacted instantly, retreating behind cargo stacks. E-web repeaters roared to life. Sustained heavy blaster fire tore through crates and cover alike, forcing the creatures into open ground. 1 Deathclaw charged directly through suppressive fire, absorbing multiple hits before reaching the nearest trooper platform. It leapt upward, claws tearing into the E-web mount and sending the operator crashing down. Vader intercepted midair. His saber sliced through both forelimbs in a precise cross pattern. The creature fell screaming, rolling across durasteel before a final thrust ended it. Behind him, another Deathclaw broke free of a shock net and tackled a trooper, jaws closing around helmet and crushing inward. Vader extended a quick force pull, dragging the creature backward across the deck before decapitating it cleanly. 3 down. 2 remained. They had stopped charging. They observed. The largest of the remaining pair, a scarred veteran, retreated slowly toward the hangar's open blast doors leading to the docking tube. It was not fleeing. It was repositioning. Suddenly, warning alarms blared across the hangar. External docking clamps disengaged. On the bridge, officers shouted over comms. Unauthorized override on docking collar. 1 Deathclaw had reached the control node during the chaos. The outer airlock began cycling open. Vacuum howled into the hangar as atmosphere destabilized. Troopers were thrown backward. Loose equipment tore free, spiraling toward the widening gap. The remaining Deathclaws anchored themselves effortlessly, claws piercing deck plating. Vader remained unmoved, boots magnetized, cape whipping violently in decompression winds. The scarred Deathclaw did not attack him. It leapt toward the docking tube, toward the void beyond. Vader's eyes narrowed behind his mask. It was not suicidal. It was migrating. The Empire's scanners registered something unexpected outside the Star Destroyer's hull. Small debris clusters from the original hyperspace rupture still orbiting nearby. Fragments, wreckage, organic mass signatures. More pods. The Alpha had not been the leader in command. It had been a pathfinder. The creatures were not random intruders. They were expanding. Vader extended his hand toward the fleeing Deathclaw, catching it mid-leap in a telekinetic snare. The creature writhed in vacuum, claws slicing at nothing as it hung, suspended between ship and stars. He studied it for a final moment. Then he released his grip. The Deathclaw hurtled into open space, colliding violently with drifting debris. Behind him, blast doors slammed shut, resealing Hangar 2. Atmosphere slowly normalized. But outside, drifting wreckage pulsed faintly with life. On the bridge, Captain Ralston swallowed hard. Long-range scans confirm additional biological signatures within debris field. Vader turned toward the viewport. The initial boarding had not been an isolated incident. It had been the beginning. And somewhere beyond Imperial sensor range, something else might be watching the spread of its apex predators into a galaxy unprepared for them. The Devastator adjusted its formation within the debris field, massive engines flaring in controlled bursts as it rotated to bring ventral batteries toward drifting fragments. The wreckage from the hyperspace anomaly remained scattered across a wide orbital plane, jagged hull plating, fractured cargo pods, metallic containers of unknown origin. And within them, life. Magnify debris cluster Oryx 7, Captain Ralston ordered. The main viewport shifted, projecting a magnified tactical overlay. Several shattered pods rotated slowly in the void. Thermal signatures pulsed faintly from within, irregular but persistent. They survived decompression, an officer said quietly. Vader stood motionless before the display. These were not spacefaring organisms. They possessed no vacuum suits, no shielding technology. Yet their physiology endured conditions that would kill most known species within seconds. He could feel them now, not through the Force as one senses emotion or intent, but as disturbances, pockets of violent instinct radiating through the cold emptiness beyond the hull. Tractor beams, Vader commanded. Isolate one pod. Blue energy lanced outward from the Star Destroyer's underbelly. One of the larger debris fragments trembled, then began drifting toward the hangar intake under controlled pull. In Hangar 3, containment protocols were already in place. Heavy blast doors sealed the chamber. Automated turrets rotated into defensive posture. Stormtroopers formed layered firing arcs from elevated platforms. An AT-ST had been positioned at the far end, its chin cannons tracking the incoming debris. The fractured pod descended through the magnetic containment field and slammed heavily onto the deck. Silence followed. Scorch marks along its hull suggested prior atmospheric entry or extreme radiation exposure. The material composition did not match known Imperial alloys. It was crude, industrial, but resilient. Internal motion registered immediately. The pod's plating bulged outward, then split. Two Deathclaws burst free simultaneously, hurling shards of metal aside like paper. They landed low, scanning the hangar in synchronized assessment. They were smaller than the Alpha, but leaner, faster. Fire, the commander shouted. Blaster bolts erupted in coordinated volleys. The creatures split in opposite directions, using cargo stacks as immediate cover. One leapt vertically, claws embedding into a support column before vaulting toward an upper platform. The AT-ST pivoted and unleashed twin cannon blasts, vaporizing the column mid-climb. The Deathclaw fell, but rolled upon impact and continued charging. A shock net launched, entangling it mid-sprint. Electricity crackled violently. It convulsed, but tore through the netting with brute force, hide smoking. Vader entered the hangar at a measured pace. He did not ignite his saber yet. He observed. The second Deathclaw had reached the lower trooper line. It barreled into them with devastating impact, sending armored bodies flying. Its claws punched through plastoid chest plates with terrifying ease. Vader extended his hand. The creature froze mid-strike as invisible pressure locked its limbs. He lifted it slowly into the air. The Deathclaw twisted violently, jaws snapping. Its tail lashed, striking nearby crates hard enough to dent reinforced metal. Vader increased pressure, not crushing, but compressing. He studied muscle density, skeletal reinforcement, nerve reaction speed. Its organs shifted slightly under sustained telekinetic strain, redundant systems compensating for trauma. Remarkable. He tightened his grip until ribs fractured audibly. Then, with a precise gesture, he hurled the creature across the hangar into the attestee's forward plating. The walker staggered but remained upright. The second Deathclaw reached him before the troopers could regroup. It came from above, dropping from a lighting strut in complete silence. Vader ignited his blade in a single fluid motion, intercepting descending talons inches from his helm. Sparks cascaded as claw met saber. The creature snarled, attempting to push past the blade to reach flesh beneath armor. Vader rotated his wrist and severed one arm at the shoulder. The limb fell to the deck, twitching. The Deathclaw did not retreat. It lunged forward regardless, jaws aiming for his respirator. Vader stepped inside its guard and drove his saber upward beneath its jaw, through skull and brainstem. The body went limp. He let it slide off the blade. Around him, troopers eliminated the final suspended target with concentrated fire. Hangar 3 fell quiet once more. But on the bridge, new data streamed across tactical screens. Additional rupture signatures detected at the perimeter of the debris field, an officer announced. Multiple pods separating. The viewport magnified again. What had initially appeared to be inert wreckage now displayed coordinated movement. Several intact pods drifted apart deliberately, spreading across a widening orbital path. They are not random survivors, Ralston said, tension tightening his voice. They are dispersing intentionally. Vader understood. Predators established territory. They were ceding it. Launch TIE squadrons, he ordered. Destroy all pods before atmospheric entry. Within minutes, TIE fighters screamed from launch bays, engines shrieking across vacuum. They weaved between debris clusters, targeting pods with precision laser bursts. Several detonated instantly, but others reacted. As lasers approached, pod exteriors split open prematurely. Deathclaws launched themselves outward, using debris fragments as cover. One clung directly to a TIE's solar panel, claws piercing through its structure before tearing into the cockpit canopy. The fighter spiraled, exploding seconds later. They're adapting mid-combat, a pilot transmitted before cutting off abruptly. Another TIE attempted close-range cannon fire, but misjudged timing. A Deathclaw hurled itself through vacuum with terrifying momentum, colliding with the cockpit and ripping it open despite explosive decompression. The vacuum did not kill them immediately. It slowed them, but their resilience held long enough to inflict lethal damage. Vader felt a ripple of calculated risk. If even one pod reached the surface of the nearby mid-rim planet below, the consequences would multiply exponentially. The planet's name scrolled across the display. Vardos Minor. Lightly populated. Agricultural exports. Minimal planetary defense. A perfect breeding ground. Interdict atmospheric descent immediately, Vader commanded. Prepare orbital bombardment if necessary. On the viewport, one larger pod ignited briefly as it entered upper atmosphere. TIEs pursued, but turbulence and debris shielding interfered with targeting. The pod burned, but did not disintegrate. It pierced cloud cover. Silence settled over the bridge. Moments later, planetary sensors reported impact in a remote forested hemisphere. Coordinates locked. Ralston hesitated. Lord Vader, if they reproduce, they will be contained, Vader interrupted coldly. He turned from the viewport. Prepare ground assault forces. We deploy. The Devastator shifted orbit, engines roaring to reposition above the impact site. Inside landing bays, Stormtrooper platoons mobilized. Scout walkers prepared for terrain engagement. Flame trooper units were requisitioned, a rare but necessary escalation. Vader returned to the hangar briefly. The corpse of the severed Deathclaw lay where it had fallen. He crouched beside it. Its hide bore scars from radiation, prior combat, environmental extremes. This species had evolved in constant war for survival. In some distant galaxy, Perhaps it had ruled the ruins of a civilization foolish enough to underestimate it. But this was the Empire's domain now. He stood. The Force coiled around him, not in anger, but in clarity. These creatures were not aligned with light or dark. They were instinct made flesh. And instinct could be eradicated. Above Vardo's Minor, clouds churned beneath gathering Star Destroyer shadow. Below, in a forest crater carved by atmospheric impact, the larger pod split open fully. 5 Deathclaws emerged into alien soil. They inhaled unfamiliar air and began to hunt. The contamination did not remain isolated to the initial Star Destroyer. It was a failure of imagination that doomed the Empire in those early hours. Imperial doctrine accounted for boarding parties, slicer infiltration, even rebel sabotage teams disguised as crew. It did not account for biological horrors capable of surviving in maintenance shafts, tearing through blast doors with talons alone, and learning the layout of a warship through instinct and predatory adaptation. The second vessel to report irregularities was an interdictor cruiser assigned to maintain hyperspace denial around the system. Its gravity well projectors hummed steadily, holding nearby shipping lanes in lockdown, while TIE patrols fanned outward in widening spirals. A routine cargo transfer from the damaged Star Destroyer had taken place just hours earlier. Replacement parts, ammunition crates, medical supplies. Inside one sealed container, a juvenile Deathclaw had remained silent and motionless, its breathing slowed to a near coma-like state. When the interdictor's crew initiated inventory processing, they unknowingly triggered its awakening. The first deaths were silent. A supply officer disappeared between 2 cargo racks. Then a deck technician failed to respond to a maintenance ping. When a patrol finally entered the hold, they found nothing but blood smeared across durasteel walls and claw marks carved into reinforced plating. Stormtroopers deployed in formation, E-11 rifles raised, scanning for movement. They expected rebel infiltrators. Instead, the overhead lights shattered as a massive shape crashed down among them. Blaster fire erupted in controlled bursts, but the creature moved too quickly. Its hide deflected grazing shots. Only concentrated volleys staggered it. 3 troopers were cut down in seconds, armor crushed as if it were paper. The surviving squad managed to bring the juvenile down, but not before it ripped open a ventilation duct and released 2 more creatures that had followed the same path. Within hours, the interdictor reported loss of multiple decks. Emergency bulkheads sealed corridors, isolating entire sections. Officers attempted to vent contaminated compartments into space, but Deathclaws adapted, clinging to internal structures, surviving explosive decompression long enough to tear their way into adjacent sectors before pressure stabilized. Their physiology, shaped by nuclear wastelands and relentless predation, proved horrifyingly resilient. Imperial medics, studying recovered tissue samples, confirmed regenerative properties, far exceeding standard galactic fauna. These were not animals in the conventional sense. They were apex survivors. News of the secondary outbreak reached Vader as he stood within the command pit of his flagship. He listened without visible reaction as officers described the breach. His gloved fingers tightened slightly against the railing. Through the Force, he sensed the spreading disruption. Not a dark side presence, not a conscious malice, but something primal and invasive. The Emperor's earlier warning echoed in his thoughts. Do not underestimate them. The Deathclaws were not aligned with the Force. They were outside its familiar currents, like shards of some other reality grinding against the galaxy's natural flow. Vader ordered immediate containment protocols across the fleet. All cargo transfers halted. Thermal scanning intensified. Stormtrooper detachments equipped with heavier repeating blasters and portable flamethrower units deployed. Yet even as the Empire mobilized, a third ship fell silent. A communications frigate tasked with relaying encrypted fleet signals transmitted a garbled distress call, screams, blaster fire, the guttural roar of something inhuman, before static consumed the channel. The infection pattern was clear now. The Deathclaws were spreading ship to ship through supply chains, emergency transfers, even escape pods launched by panic crew. The Empire's strength, its logistical efficiency, had become its vulnerability. Standardized procedures created predictable pathways, and the creatures exploited them instinctively. They were not coordinating through intelligence networks. They were following centrales, heat signatures, vibrations. Yet their effectiveness was undeniable. Vader made a decision that would reverberate across the sector. He ordered one of the compromised vessels scuttled with all hands aboard. The captain protested, insisting that evacuation was still possible. Vader silenced him with a single force choke, lifting the officer off the deck before releasing him lifeless at the feet of stunned bridge personnel. "No further spread," Vader commanded. "The ship is lost." Turbolasers fired from adjacent destroyers, reducing the infected vessel to molten debris. Hundreds of Imperial lives were sacrificed in seconds. It was a necessary calculation. The Empire valued order above sentiment. Despite the destruction, reports indicated that debris from the scuttled ship drifted toward nearby trade lanes. Small civilian freighters had been caught in the interdiction field earlier. One such vessel, a Corellian transport carrying industrial equipment, unknowingly intercepted a damaged escape pod. The pod latched magnetically to its hull, its occupants silent within. Hours later, while en route to a neutral world on the edge of Hutt-controlled space, the freighter's internal security cameras captured a shadow moving across the cargo bay. The crisis was no longer contained within the Imperial fleet. It was spreading outward, bleeding into the wider galaxy. Back aboard the flagship, Vader convened a tactical briefing. Imperial intelligence proposed deploying specialized hunter-killer teams equipped with advanced ion weaponry and heavy incendiary devices. The creature's biological resilience made standard blaster engagements inefficient. Prolonged firefights increased casualties. Thermal targeting appeared more effective. Concentrated heat disrupted their regenerative processes temporarily. Vader approved the development of new tactics, but he understood that adaptation cut both ways. Every engagement taught the Deathclaws more about Imperial defenses. As fleet morale wavered, whispers began among officers. Some spoke of curses. Others speculated that the creatures were Sith experiments gone wrong, unleashed accidentally by rival dark side factions. The unknown bred fear, and fear undermined discipline. Vader felt it in the Force, a ripple of unease spreading through thousands of minds. He turned that fear outward, channeling it into ruthless focus. Failure would not be tolerated. Survival required eradication. Yet even Vader could not fully predict the next development. On the fringe of Hutt space, the infected Corellian transport docked at Nar Shaddaa, the smuggler's moon. Its crew disembarked, unaware that 2 Deathclaws had already slaughtered half their number during transit and were now stalking through maintenance corridors. Within hours, screams echoed through one of the moon's lower docking districts. Crime lords dismissed initial reports as gang violence. By the time security droids confirmed the presence of unknown biological entities, multiple hangars lay in ruins. The Empire's problem had become the galaxy's problem. And somewhere in the dark between stars, another damaged escape pod drifted silently, its interior scratched from within. Nar Shaddaa did not panic. It adapted. The smuggler's moon had endured invasions, gang wars, Imperial crackdowns, and internal purges by Hutts who considered entire districts expendable. Violence was currency there. But what spread through docking Sector 8 was not organized crime. It was slaughter without negotiation. The first Hutt enforcers sent to investigate never returned. Their comlinks transmitted fractured images, something massive moving too quickly for clear capture, claws carving through armored skiffs, blaster bolts splashing harmlessly across scaled hide before a guttural roar drowned out the feed. Within hours, 3 crime syndicates had sealed their territories and deployed heavy weapons teams. Nar Shaddaa did not call for help. It fortified. The Deathclaws moved through the Undercity like they had been born to it. The vertical maze of platforms, neon-lit gantries, exhaust vents, and waste tunnels provided endless hunting corridors. Their senses adapted to artificial atmospheres with alarming speed. Heat signatures replaced scent. Vibrations through durasteel floors substituted for open terrain. They learned the rhythm of the moon's industrial heartbeat and hunted between its pulses. By the time Imperial probes reached NAR Shada's orbit, at least 6 confirmed Deathclaws had established themselves across 2 lower districts. Darth Vader's shuttle descended through the neon haze personally. This was no longer a fleet containment issue. It was escalation. He stepped onto a landing platform littered with scorch marks and corpses, Nyctoguards, weak-waist smugglers, a shattered security droid torn apart by brute force. The smell of ozone from discharged blasters mixed with the copper tang of blood and the sour reek of industrial coolant leaking from ruptured pipes. Imperial Stormtroopers formed a perimeter while Hutt representatives watched from a safe distance, their expressions tight with restrained outrage. One Hutt emissary slithered forward, flanked by heavily armed bodyguards. "These beasts," the Hutt rumbled through a translator unit, "are Imperial responsibility." Vader did not deny it. "Their extinction will be achieved," he said calmly. The Hutt's eyes narrowed. "If not, the Empire will compensate." Vader's helmet tilted slightly. "There will be no compensation." The Force shifted subtly. The Hutt felt it, a cold pressure, a warning. Negotiations ended there. Imperial hunter-killer units deployed across the lower levels with upgraded equipment. Flame troopers advanced in controlled formations, igniting corridors in sweeping arcs of fire. E-web heavy repeaters were mounted at choke points. Motion trackers, calibrated to detect large biosignatures, swept continuously. The first coordinated engagement began in Waste Processing Sublevel 3. A patrol of 12 stormtroopers moved through a narrow corridor lined with flickering maintenance lights. Melted metal streaked the walls. The silence was oppressive. Then the ceiling collapsed. A Deathclaw dropped directly into the formation, scattering troopers like debris. Its claws pierced plastoid armor effortlessly. Blaster fire erupted at point-blank range, searing its flank, but it did not retreat. It lunged forward, jaws snapping shut around a trooper's shoulder and tearing him in half. Flame troopers reacted instantly. Twin streams of fire engulfed the creature. It roared, this time not in dominance, but pain. Its regenerative tissue blackened under sustained heat. It staggered. Vader stepped into the corridor. With a subtle motion of his hand, the Force seized the Deathclaw mid-lunge. The creature thrashed violently, muscles bulging as it fought the invisible grip. It had no understanding of telekinesis, no reverence for mysticism. It fought because it lived to fight. Vader tightened his grasp. Durasteel buckled around the creature's limbs as he compressed space itself around its body. Bones cracked. The roar became a strangled hiss. Then he hurled it backward into a wall with crushing force. The corridor shook. For a moment, silence returned. But Vader felt it. Not 1, not 6, more. The Deathclaws were multiplying. Recovered sensor logs from the original Star Destroyer suggested that several egg-like biological masses had been present in cargo bays before the first confirmed attacks. The Empire had assumed those were debris or contaminated containers. They had been wrong. NAR Shada's warm, resource-rich environment had accelerated gestation. In a hidden maintenance chamber near the reactor core of Docking Sector 8, 3 juvenile Deathclaws tore free from leathery casings and inhaled recycled air for the first time. The infestation was evolving. Imperial intelligence presented Vader with a grim assessment. If even one infected civilian vessel left NAR Shada undetected, the creatures could spread across trade routes into mid-rim systems within weeks. Standard quarantine measures were insufficient. The moon's black market hyperspace lanes were impossible to fully monitor. Vader contacted Coruscant. Palpatine's hologram flickered to life in a secure command chamber aboard the flagship. "You feel it," the Emperor said softly. "Yes, my master." "They are disruptive. They breed rapidly." A thin smile crossed the Emperor's face. "Then the lesson is simple, Lord Vader. Demonstrate overwhelming consequence." Vader understood. Extermination was no longer surgical. It would be exemplary. He ordered orbital bombardment authorization for for the infected districts. Hut representatives protested violently. NAR Shada was valuable, profitable. Bombardment would destabilize entire criminal networks. Vader ignored them. Star Destroyers in orbit adjusted position. Turbolasers fired. Entire sections of the moon's lower levels were reduced to molten slag in minutes. Firestorms erupted across industrial sectors. Shockwaves rippled through the moon's structural supports, causing cascading blackouts. Thousands died. The Deathclaws did not. Several survived by retreating deeper into maintenance shafts beyond bombardment impact zones. Others leapt between platforms before collapse. One massive specimen, larger than the rest, emerged from the firestorm itself, hide charred but body intact. Vader sensed it immediately. This one was different. It moved not with panic, but with purpose. Imperial troops regrouped as the massive Deathclaw climbed through debris toward an open docking bay. Its claws gouged durasteel as it ascended. It ignored blaster fire, pushing forward through pain. Vader stepped into its path. For the first time since their arrival, Predator and Sith regarded one another directly. The Deathclaw's yellow eyes locked onto the black figure before it. No fear. No hesitation. It charged. Vader ignited his lightsaber in a flash of crimson. The blade carved across the creature's shoulder, slicing through scale and muscle. It howled but did not fall. Its claw struck Vader's armor with bone-crushing force, sending him sliding across the deck plating. Stormtroopers opened fire, but Vader raised a hand, stopping them. This was his. The Deathclaw lunged again. Vader met it head-on. The duel was brutal and immediate, force against raw evolutionary savagery. Vader severed one forelimb, but the creature's jaws snapped inches from his helmet. He unleashed a torrent of force lightning at point-blank range, electricity crawling across its body. It convulsed violently. Finally, with a decisive downward strike, Vader drove his blade through its skull. The massive form collapsed at his feet. Silence fell across the docking bay. Yet, even in death, Vader felt no resolution. The bombardment had contained NAR Shada, for now. But long-range scanners from the outer rim had reported something troubling. A derelict civilian freighter had entered hyperspace from the moon's shadow hours before orbital lockdown was established. Its destination was unknown, and inside its cargo hold, surveillance footage briefly captured a familiar silhouette moving in darkness. The infestation had escaped again. The freighter's designation was Mercy of Karth, a battered Troc 720 that had spent most of its operational life hauling illegal Tabana gas canisters and refurbished battle droids through black market corridors the Empire pretended not to see. Its transponder codes were legitimate enough to pass cursory scans, its hull scarred enough to avoid attention, and its captain desperate enough to leave NAR Shada the moment orbital bombardment began. No one aboard knew they were no longer alone. The Deathclaw that had escaped NAR Shada's firestorm had not fled blindly. It had moved toward vibration, toward engines cycling up for hyperspace departure. The cargo bay of the Mercy of Karth had been stacked with sealed containers and scrap machinery salvaged from the lower districts. In the chaos of evacuation, one maintenance hatch had been left unsecured. That was all it needed. When the ship jumped to hyperspace, the creature was already inside. Hyperspace distorted reality in ways biological organisms were never meant to perceive. Even hardened spacers felt unease when the stars stretched into infinite white lines. The Deathclaw felt something else entirely. Its nervous system reacted violently at first, muscle spasms, disorientation, but it adapted with alarming speed. The universe might shift around it, but its purpose remained constant. Hunt. Survive. Dominate. The first crewman died less than 30 minutes into the jump. A deckhand investigating strange scraping noises near cargo bay 3 opened the hatch with mild irritation. He barely had time to register the shape crouched in shadow before claws split him from collarbone to hip. The scream echoed through the freighter's narrow corridors. Blasters came out fast. The Mercy of Karth's crew were not civilians. They were smugglers, mechanics, and former pirates who knew how to fight. but tight corridors favored the Predator. The Deathclaw moved through the ship's skeleton like liquid muscle, bursting from ventilation shafts, smashing through bulkheads, retreating before concentrated fire could land. By the time the captain attempted to drop from hyperspace, the navicomputer controls were already offline. The Deathclaw had learned. On NAR Shada, it had adapted to industrial terrain. On the freighter, it adapted to systems. It tore through wiring clusters instinctively, drawn by heat and vibration. Lights flickered. Artificial gravity destabilized. The ship shuddered violently as hyperspace calculations glitched. And then hyperspace collapsed. The Mercy of Karth tore back into real space violently, alarms screaming as the freighter tumbled uncontrolled above a sparsely populated mid-rim system. Ord Mantell. The Empire had a presence there. Light but present. The freighter limped into atmosphere, trailing smoke. It never reached a safe landing zone. Imperial Customs patrols detected the uncontrolled descent and dispatched a garrison unit to intercept. By the time Stormtroopers reached the crash site outside Worldport's scrapyard districts, the Mercy of Karth had already torn itself open against the ground. The wreckage was quiet. Too quiet. Lieutenant Barris of the local Imperial detachment approached cautiously, helmet optics scanning for life signs. He detected faint biological signatures within the fractured hull. Survivors, perhaps. He signaled advance. Inside the wreckage, smoke and burning fuel created a suffocating haze. Bodies lay strewn across tilted decks. A torn hyperspace console flickered erratically. Then the motion trackers spiked. Barris barely had time to shout before a Deathclaw erupted from beneath a collapsed bulkhead, sending 3 stormtroopers flying. Blaster fire filled the interior, ricocheting wildly. The creature tore through plastoid armor like paper, moving with terrifying speed in zero-gravity pockets where artificial systems had failed. Barris ordered a retreat, but the Deathclaw was not alone. The gestation mass that had escaped NAR Shada had not produced just one offspring before the freighter's departure. 2 smaller Deathclaws crawled from shattered containers near the rear cargo bay, their scales still slick but already hardened. Ord Mantell became the next hunting ground. Within hours, Imperial Command relayed emergency transmissions to Coruscant. Darth Vader received them in silence aboard his flagship. The infestation had reached a world. Palpatine's voice crackled through encrypted channels shortly after. Your containment has failed, Lord Vader. It will be corrected. You will not merely correct it, the Emperor replied. You will make of it an example. Vader understood what that meant. Ord Mantell was expendable, but he sensed something else as well, through the Force, faint but unmistakable. The Deathclaws were not Force-sensitive in any conventional sense. Yet their violent disruption of life created ripples. Predatory intent radiated like a dark stain across living currents. They were becoming something more than feral beasts. The Empire escalated immediately. An entire Star Destroyer task group moved into Ord Mantell's orbit. Surface-to-orbit scans mapped the creature's movements as best as possible, though they evaded detection with infuriating efficiency. The scrapyard districts offered endless cover. Mountains of discarded starship hulls, half-buried engines, twisted durasteel towers that formed labyrinthine corridors of rust and shadow. The Deathclaws thrived there. Imperial walkers deployed in hunting formations. AT-STS scanned between scrap towers, while flame trooper units swept enclosed zones. TIE fighters strafed suspected movement clusters from above. The creatures adapted again. One Deathclaw leapt from the skeletal frame of a derelict cruiser directly onto an AT-ST cockpit, claws punching through transparent steel. Another burrowed beneath loose scrap to ambush ground troops. The juveniles learned from observation, coordinating flanking maneuvers instinctively. They were not mindless. They were evolving tactically. Vader descended personally once more. This time, he did not deploy troops immediately. He stood at the edge of a massive scrapyard valley, the air thick with metallic dust and the distant whine of repulsor cranes. The Force coiled uneasily around him. He felt the dominant specimen first. Larger than the NAR Shada Alpha. Stronger. The Deathclaw had consumed heavily since arriving. Stormtroopers, local scavengers, even a downed walker crew. Its body mass had increased. Its scales bore fresh scars from blaster fire and shrapnel, but it moved with renewed confidence. It sensed Vader too. Predator recognized predator. The confrontation erupted without warning. The Deathclaw launched from a towering scrap pile with impossible speed, claws extended. Vader ignited his blade mid-motion, meeting the charge with precise brutality. Sparks flew as saber met bone. The impact drove Vader backward through a rusted engine housing. He countered with telekinetic force, slamming the creature into a wall of scrap that collapsed around it. Metal avalanched downward. The Deathclaw burst through. It had learned to anticipate the invisible assault. Vader increased intensity, hurling entire chunks of starship hull like projectiles. The creature dodged with predatory agility, closing distance again. One claw raked across Vader's shoulder plating, denting it deeply. For a fraction of a second, pain flared through his damaged nerves. The Deathclaw pressed advantage. Vader unleashed concentrated force, lightning directly into its open jaws. Electricity surged through muscle and bone. The creature convulsed, roaring in fury. Rather than submission, the duel was no longer simple extermination. It was dominance. Finally, Vader lifted the Deathclaw entirely off the ground, suspending it midair. The creature thrashed violently, tail smashing into scrap towers, claws gouging at empty air. Vader compressed. Bone cracked audibly. With a final motion, he hurled the broken body against the remains of a crashed cruiser, where it lay still. The juvenile scattered instantly, retreating deeper into the scrapyard labyrinth. The Alpha was dead, but not the species. Imperial commanders recommended full planetary sterilization. Orbital bombardment would end it quickly. Vader hesitated. Ord Mantell held supply value. And more importantly, he sensed that destruction alone would not prevent recurrence. The creatures adapted too rapidly. If they reached another densely populated world, consequences would multiply exponentially. A new strategy was required. Containment through fear had failed. Now the Empire would attempt something far more dangerous. Capture. The order to capture a live Deathclaw did not originate from Imperial Science Division. It came from Darth Vader himself. That alone sent tremors through the chain of command. Ord Mantell had already cost the Empire nearly 300 Stormtroopers, multiple walkers, and untold civilian casualties in the scrapyard districts. The surviving Deathclaws, 2 juveniles, and at least 1 fully matured specimen, had vanished into the planet's industrial wastelands. Standard doctrine dictated orbital sterilization and quarantine. But Vader sensed something deeper. These creatures were not merely aggressive fauna. Their adaptability bordered on strategic evolution. They learned from blaster fire patterns. They avoided repeated patrol routes. They shifted hunting zones when air support intensified. They exploited weak points in formations with unnerving precision. In the Force, they did not glow like Jedi nor burn like Sith. They churned. A storm of instinct and violent life energy that refused to be extinguished. Palpatine approved the experiment without hesitation. If they can adapt, the Emperor mused through holographic transmission, his hooded face flickering blue in Vader's command chamber, then perhaps they can be directed. Weaponized. The concept was monstrous. Vader did not object. The Empire deployed a mobile containment division, specialized units trained in subduing large-scale fauna from hostile Outer Rim worlds. Heavy ion nets, reinforced durasteel cages, neurotoxin projectors calibrated for high-mass organisms. Flame troopers accompanied by shock baton squads. Probe droids mapped subterranean scrap tunnels continuously. The trap was set in the largest remaining scrapyard basin, a canyon of collapsed cruisers and broken transports that created natural choke points. They baited it. Not with civilians. With a walker. An AT-AT stood alone in the basin center, power cores cycling loudly, shields lowered to minimal defensive output. It radiated heat and vibration like a wounded beast. Deathclaws responded to stimulus. They came at dusk. The first juvenile burst from beneath a collapsed starship wing, racing toward the walker's rear leg assembly. The second followed from above, leaping down from stacked cargo containers. Imperial forces waited until both committed. Ion nets fired simultaneously. Blue energy lattices enveloped the juveniles mid-charge, slamming them into the scrap-littered ground. They thrashed violently, claws slicing through energy strands, but the nets recalibrated dynamically, tightening in response to resistance. Flame troopers advanced cautiously, and then the basin trembled. The mature Deathclaw emerged. It did not charge blindly. It circled, assessing. Its scarred scales reflected the basin's dying sunlight, one eye marked with a burn from Vader's lightning during their previous encounter. It recognized the trap. It saw the immobilized juveniles. It calculated. Then it attacked from the flank. Instead of the walker, it targeted the Ion control team. It moved with terrifying intelligence, weaving through scrap barriers and using debris as cover from sniper fire. Blaster bolts struck its hide, but failed to slow it meaningfully. Within seconds, it tore through the Ion net control console, severing the energy feed. The juveniles broke free instantly. The basin erupted into chaos. AT-AT cannons fired point-blank, blasting apart starship hulls as the creatures scattered. Flamethrowers ignited entire sections of scrap towers, turning the basin into a blazing furnace of metal and smoke. Vader descended directly into the inferno. His cape whipped in the heat currents as he landed between the walker and the charging Alpha. This time, he did not underestimate it. The Deathclaw feinted left before lunging right, targeting the joint between Vader's shoulder armor and respirator collar. Vader anticipated. He sidestepped and severed part of the creature's tail in a clean arc. The limb crashed against scrap with a metallic thud. The Deathclaw did not falter. It used the momentum of pain to drive forward, slamming Vader into the basin wall. The impact cratered durasteel plating behind him. Stormtroopers hesitated, unable to fire without risking their commander. Vader responded with overwhelming force pressure, crushing the air around the creature's torso. Muscles strained against invisible compression. Bone creaked. But instead of suffocating, the Deathclaw adapted. It rolled its body, twisting free from the direct choke and using its remaining tail base to destabilize Vader's footing. For a split second, balance shifted. The Alpha roared directly into Vader's helmet, close enough that its breath fogged the lenses. Vader unleashed a concentrated shockwave that sent the creature skidding across the basin floor. This time, instead of pursuing lethally, he altered strategy. He targeted joints. Precise saber strikes disabled forelimb tendons without killing. A telekinetic slam pinned the creature against the walker's leg assembly. Ion nets redeployed. Heavier models reinforced for capital ship boarding operations. They wrapped around the Alpha in layered containment. It thrashed with impossible fury, snapping cables, cracking durasteel restraints. But Vader amplified the nets with sustained force pressure, reinforcing them telekinetically. Sedate, he ordered. Neurotoxin injectors fired simultaneously. The Alpha resisted longer than expected. Its heart rate spiked beyond projected biological thresholds. Its nervous system attempted to override paralysis agents. But gradually, inch by inch, its movements slowed. It did not lose consciousness easily. It glared at Vader even as muscles locked. Recognition, hatred, defiance. When it finally collapsed fully immobilized, the basin fell silent except for burning scrap and distant walker servos. The juveniles escaped during the chaos. 2 remained at large, but the Empire had secured the prize. The captured Deathclaw was transported to an Imperial research vessel in orbit above Ord Mantell. Not to Coruscant. Not yet. Palpatine wanted controlled observation first. Within reinforced containment chambers, lined with cortosis mesh and energy-dampening fields, scientists began analysis. They documented regenerative capacity, bone density, neural patterns. What they discovered unsettled even hardened xenobiologists. The creature's brain exhibited rapid adaptive restructuring in response to stimuli. Synaptic pathways shifted dynamically, strengthening after each exposure to new environmental stressors. It was evolution accelerated. Under controlled tests, the Deathclaw learned to anticipate stun baton arcs after only 3 repetitions. It adjusted breathing patterns to resist airborne sedatives. It even tracked hidden surveillance droids via subtle mechanical vibrations. One scientist proposed implanting behavioral inhibitors. Another suggested cloning. Palpatine's message arrived before either plan proceeded. "Release it," the Emperor commanded. Vader stood alone in the observation chamber when the containment field dropped. The Deathclaw's paralysis had worn off hours earlier. It had remained still, conserving energy. When the field vanished, it did not charge blindly. It stepped forward slowly. Vader entered the chamber. No saber ignited. No troops flanked him. The 2 predators faced one another across cold durasteel flooring. The Deathclaw lunged. Vader did not strike lethally. He redirected momentum, slamming it against reinforced walls, testing reactions. The duel was shorter this time. The creature adapted to force pushes more effectively, grounding its stance. Preemptively, anchoring claws into the floor. It was learning the force's rhythm. Vader ended the confrontation by lifting the creature entirely and pinning it against the ceiling with crushing telekinetic weight. "Yield," he murmured, not as command, but as observation. The Deathclaw did not yield. Even suspended, ribs cracking audibly, it continued to struggle. Vader felt something shift then. Not submission, but acknowledgement. This was not an animal that could be domesticated. It could only be directed through fear of superior dominance. Vader released pressure slowly. The Deathclaw dropped heavily to the floor, breathing ragged. Neither attacked again. In that silent chamber, a brutal understanding formed. The Empire could unleash these creatures, but they could never truly control them. Palpatine's laughter echoed faintly through hidden speakers. "Send it back," the Emperor instructed. "Let it hunt." Vader understood the implication. Ord Mantell would remain a testing ground. The Deathclaw was returned to the surface under covert deployment. The Empire would observe how it rebuilt dominance without direct interference. Because if it could establish territorial control on a planet under Imperial oversight, it could be unleashed elsewhere. And somewhere in the scrapyard wastelands below, 2 juveniles were already growing. Ord Mantell did not descend into chaos overnight. It evolved into something worse. The return of the Alpha Deathclaw was not marked by fireworks or Imperial announcements. No broadcasts warned citizens. No stormtrooper patrols adjusted routes. The Empire wanted observation, not containment. They wanted to see what happened when a predator was placed back into an ecosystem already destabilized by war. The result was brutal efficiency. Within hours of release, Imperial probe droids began losing telemetry in the scrapyard zones. Not destroyed, gone. Signals cut mid-transmission. Patrol squads dispatched to investigate returned shaken or did not return at all. Survivors spoke of coordinated ambushes, not random attacks. Stormtroopers reported being herded into kill funnels, flanked by creatures that should not have been capable of such planning. There were now 3. The Alpha had reunited with the juveniles, and something had changed. The juveniles no longer behaved like impulsive predators. They mirrored the Alpha's tactics, spacing, timing, positioning. They did not attack simultaneously. They layered pressure, forcing squads to split attention until formation discipline collapsed. Imperial Command flagged the pattern immediately. This was pack behavior, but not animal pack behavior. Tactical pack behavior. Vader reviewed the footage aboard his Star Destroyer, hands clasped behind his back as the holotuble replayed the massacre of an armored scout team. The Deathclaws did not simply charge. One forced retreat, another flanked. The Alpha delivered the killing strike. It was clean, intentional. "They are learning faster outside containment," an officer reported. Vader did not respond. In the Force, Ord Mantell felt wrong. Not dark, not corrupted, hungry. Life energy twisted around the scrapyard basin like a tightening coil. The Deathclaws were reshaping the environment simply by existing within it. Scavenger species migrated away. Predator fauna vanished entirely. Even the local criminal factions, normally impossible to dislodge, had abandoned the district. The Empire's experiment was no longer theoretical. This was territorial conquest. Without command, without doctrine, pure survival dominance. Palpatine contacted Vader before he could issue orbital sterilization. "Observe," the Emperor instructed. "Do not interfere yet." "They are destabilizing Imperial ground control," Vader replied. "Yes," Palpatine said, amused. "And they're doing so without ships, without strategy councils, without politics. Imagine them unleashed on a battlefield already in motion." Vader understood. The Deathclaws were being evaluated as living shock weapons, not as controlled assets, as catalysts. Back on the surface, Imperial Command attempted a different approach. Instead of direct confrontation, they withdrew visible patrols from the scrapyard perimeter. Automated turrets were installed along exit corridors. Motion sensors layered across the terrain. A containment ring, not to trap the creatures inside, but to map their movement. The Alpha noticed immediately. It approached the perimeter cautiously, testing response. A turret fired warning bursts. The creature retreated, not in fear, but in assessment. Minutes later, the juveniles attacked the turret from separate angles, forcing its targeting system to split focus. The Alpha struck from beneath. It had tunneled. The turret vanished in sparks and torn metal. The containment ring began collapsing piece by piece over the next 6 hours. Every sensor lost followed the same pattern: bait, distraction, decisive strike. The Deathclaws were dismantling Imperial infrastructure like veteran saboteurs. Vader deployed personally. His shuttle cut through Ord Mantell's polluted sky, landing at the edge of the scrapyard basin. Stormtroopers established a perimeter, but he waved them back. This was not their fight. He walked alone into the metal labyrinth. The force vibrated with tension. Heat signatures flickered through scrap walls. The creatures were watching. He felt their positions shift like pieces on a living board. The first juvenile attacked from above. Vader ignited his saber mid-turn, severing a claw strike that would have crushed Durasteel. The creature twisted mid-air, landing behind him. The second juvenile burst from the ground, jaws snapping. He force-pushed both simultaneously, sending them crashing through wreckage. The Alpha did not rush. It circled. Vader pivoted slowly, tracking its movement without sight. The creature stepped deliberately, claws scraping metal in rhythmic cadence. It was measuring him again, remembering the last encounter. This was not rage. This was strategy. The Alpha lunged, not at Vader's torso, but at his footing. It shattered the ground beneath him, forcing a momentary imbalance. The juveniles attacked in that instant, synchronized. Vader responded with brutal precision. A telekinetic wave hurled scrap into the attackers. One juvenile was pinned against a collapsed hull. The other recovered instantly, slashing at Vader's back. His saber intercepted the strike, sparks cascading across his armor. The Alpha closed. For several seconds, the scrapyard became a blur of motion and force pressure. Vader's strikes were lethal, but controlled. He aimed to disable, not kill, yet the creatures adapted mid-fight. They stopped repeating failed angles. They tested reactions. They anticipated force pushes by grounding themselves or using debris as anchors. They were learning during combat. Vader escalated. He unleashed a force pulse that cratered the basin floor, throwing all 3 Deathclaws outward. Metal screamed. Shock waves rippled through wreckage towers. The juveniles rose immediately. The Alpha rose slower. But when it did not charge. It roared. The sound was not merely animal fury. It was a declaration, a territorial challenge. The force reacted around it like air compressing before a storm. Vader advanced. The Alpha met him head-on. Their collision shook the scrapyard. Saber clashed against bone and scale. Vader's strikes carved shallow wounds that regenerated faster than expected. The creature's claws scraped sparks from his armor, each hit carrying enough force to shatter lesser plating. This was no longer containment. This was dominance. Vader shifted tactics mid-swing. Instead of overpowering, he redirected momentum, forcing the Alpha into the juvenile's path. The creatures collided, momentarily disoriented. That was all he needed. A crushing, telekinetic hold pinned all three to the ground. They fought it. They always fought it. Muscles strained. Claws dug trenches into metal. But Vader's pressure increased until the basin itself groaned. Enough, he said. The Alpha stopped first. Not submission. Recognition. It understood escalation. It understood loss. The juveniles followed suit seconds later. Vader released them. The creatures did not attack again. They withdrew slowly, eyes locked on him until distance swallowed their forms. The scrapyard fell silent except for Vader's respirator. He did not pursue. They had learned something more important than combat. They had learned hierarchy. Orbit-side sensors recorded the aftermath. Imperial analysts documented the shift immediately. The Deathclaws did not dismantle another perimeter installation. They stayed within their territory. Patrol losses ceased. Not because the threat was gone. Because it had boundaries. Palpatine's laughter echoed through Vader's mind later that night. They understand power, the Emperor said. That makes them useful. Vader looked down at Ord Mantell's scarred surface through the viewport. They will never serve, he replied. They do not need to, Palpatine answered. They only need to be pointed. And somewhere below, the Deathclaws expanded their territory carefully, deliberately, testing the edges of Imperial patience. The Empire had not conquered them. It had entered an uneasy coexistence with something that did not fear conquest. And that was far more dangerous. Ord Mantell did not return to normal after Vader's confrontation. It stabilized into something colder. Imperial Command officially designated the Scrapyard Basin a restricted biohazard zone. Civilian traffic was rerouted. Criminal syndicates were quietly warned off under threat of orbital enforcement. Stormtrooper patrols maintained distance, not out of fear, but calculation. The Empire had decided that containment was preferable to annihilation, for now. But containment did not mean inactivity. The Deathclaws were expanding. Not in numbers. Imperial scans confirmed no new life signatures, but in influence. The scrapyard ecosystem had reorganized around them. Scavenger species avoided entire sectors. Native predators vanished completely. Even environmental patterns shifted. Dust storms circled the basin rather than crossing it, as if the planet itself respected territorial boundaries. Imperial analysts struggled to categorize the phenomenon. The Force did not. Vader felt it every time he looked toward the planet. The Deathclaws were not Force-sensitive. They did not bend energy or manipulate perception. Yet their presence created pressure in the living field, like a gravitational mass pressing against currents that normally flowed freely. They were anchors, biological certainties that rejected ambiguity. And the galaxy did not like certainty. Reports began arriving from beyond Ord Mantell. A smuggler vessel attempting to breach the quarantine perimeter vanished. Black box telemetry recovered days later revealed torn hull plating and internal damage inconsistent with conventional weapons. Another Imperial scouting craft reported biological interference before its signal cut entirely. The Deathclaws were leaving, not through Imperial checkpoints, through space. The revelation triggered immediate emergency sessions aboard the Star Destroyer. Holoprojections displayed reconstructed footage. A Deathclaw clinging to the underside of a departing cargo vessel, its claws embedded deep enough to survive atmospheric escape. The creature detached in low orbit, drifting toward debris fields and abandoned structures like a living boarding missile. They are adapting to vacuum exposure, an officer said, disbelief creeping into his voice. Their physiology is compensating. They are spreading, another added quietly. Vader stood motionless as the implications unfolded. These creatures did not require ships. They required opportunity. Palpatine's presence arrived through holotransmission moments later. His expression was calm, almost pleased. "You see," the Emperor said. "Evolution without guidance. Efficient. Terrifying." "They will destabilize sectors if allowed to proliferate," Vader replied. Palpatine's smile sharpened. "Only if uncontrolled." The Emperor issued new directives. Observation shifted to weaponization. Imperial Black projects activated across nearby systems. Specialized capture teams deployed with stun nets calibrated for extreme tensile strength. Bounty hunters were contracted with sealed orders. The goal was no longer passive study. It was acquisition. The first capture attempt failed catastrophically. A reinforced freighter lured a lone juvenile into a magnetic trap field. For several minutes, telemetry suggested success. Then internal cameras showed the creature chewing through energy conduits with horrifying patience. The ship lost gravity, drifted into a debris cluster, and detonated under cascading overload. The Deathclaw survived. The second attempt succeeded, but only technically. A juvenile was secured inside a null-gravity containment cylinder aboard an Imperial research station. Scientists began immediate analysis. Muscle density readings defied classification. Cellular regeneration rates accelerated under stress. Neural mapping revealed pattern recognition centers comparable to advanced sentient species. Then the creature learned the station's rhythm. Within 2 hours, it timed its resistance to coincide with maintenance cycles. When power fluctuations hit, it shattered its restraints and tore through 3 sealed corridors before security teams responded. By the time Vader arrived, the research wing was a blood-slick labyrinth. He found the juvenile standing over a fallen trooper, breathing slow, deliberate. It did not attack him. It waited. He ended the confrontation quickly, but not without understanding something crucial. They were not becoming more aggressive. They were becoming more aware. The Empire adjusted again. Direct capture operations ceased. Instead, containment doctrine shifted toward environmental isolation. The scrapyard basin on Ord Mantell was expanded into a full quarantine world. Orbital defense platforms enforced a no-fly zone. Any vessel entering without authorization was destroyed. The Deathclaws were given a planet, not as mercy, as a laboratory. Time passed. Weeks became months. No new Deathclaw incursions were reported beyond the quarantine perimeter. Imperial intelligence cautiously classified the situation as stable. Trade routes resumed normal patterns. Outer rim tensions returned to familiar rhythms of rebellion and suppression. Yet the Force remained restless. Vader returned to Ord Mantell alone. His shuttle descended through storm clouds that spiraled unnaturally around the basin. The scrapyard had transformed. Metal ruins were reshaped into territorial markers. Massive carcasses, native predators dragged from miles away, lined the perimeter like warnings. He walked into their domain. They did not ambush him. They approached openly. The Alpha emerged first, larger now, its scales thicker, movement slower, but heavier with intent. The juveniles flanked behind, no longer reckless. Their eyes tracked Vader with measured intelligence. This was not a confrontation. This was acknowledgement. The Alpha stepped forward until only meters separated them. The Force tightened, waiting for violence that did not come. Vader extended his senses, feeling the creature's presence. Steady, immense, unyielding. A predator that did not need conquest. Only space. The Alpha roared once, low and resonant. The juveniles echoed it. Then they turned and walked back into the scrapyard, disappearing among twisted metal like ghosts. Vader remained standing long after the echoes faded. The Empire had tried to classify them, control them, weaponize them. The Deathclaws had chosen something simpler. They existed, and the galaxy adjusted around that fact. Back aboard his flagship, Vader reported to Palpatine. "They are stable," he said. "Contained." "For now," Palpatine replied. "Everything changes." Vader looked out into the stars. Some threats were enemies. Some were tools. And some were reminders that the galaxy was vast enough to produce horrors that did not care about empire or rebellion. Ord Mantell rotated quietly below. a quarantined world. A territory claimed by creatures that needed no banner, no fleet, no ideology. Only survival. And for the first time in a long while, the Empire had learned to leave something alone. The Deathclaws never became Imperial weapons, nor did they collapse into extinction under orbital fire. They carved out a place in the galaxy through sheer biological certainty, forcing even the Empire to acknowledge limits. Ord Mantell became a scar on the star charts, a reminder that conquest was not always measured in fleets or politics. Vader understood this better than most. Power could dominate systems, but existence itself could not always be commanded. The Deathclaws had not won a war, nor lost one. They simply endured, reshaping their environment until even the Force adjusted around them. Somewhere in that uneasy balance lay a truth the Empire would never admit. Not every threat could be ruled, and not every world needed to be broken. Some presences were warnings, living proof that the galaxy remained wild, unpredictable, and vast enough to humble even an empire. The multiverse doesn't end here. New invasions, new empires, and new worlds collide daily. If you enjoy deep cinematic what-if scenarios like this, subscribe and join Multiverse Galaxy if